The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello.
Mehmet, are you there?
Hi, this is Mehmet. How are you? I'm here.
Very good. Where are you based? Where are you calling from?
Newark, Delaware, United States.
Delaware. So it must be very early for you.
Yeah, it's 6 a.m.
6 a.m. That's not too bad.
Mm-hmm. No, that's all right. That's okay.
Thank you for joining us. We will be starting momentarily in a few minute.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Perhaps 1 or 2 minutes. My name is Ali Sheikh, and I'm a colleague of Rafael, who has been in touch with you.
Yes.
And I understand Professor Saleem will not be joining, so the ball is in your court.
Yes, correct. It's nice to meet you. I haven't seen Dr. Ali for a while. He is not in the United States at the moment, but from his emails, I understand he won't be joining.
That's right. That's right. That's fine. That's fine, though.
Yeah.
It's quite all right. And
okay, good.
Just give us a couple of more minutes. We are otherwise quite ready. I just wanted to give a couple of more minutes to a colleague who had agreed to moderate so that I don't have to speak. And
okay, sounds good.
I'll just see if he comes. There's two, otherwise we'll ask on the phone. How are you? Assalamu very well, sir. Waiting for our moderator. The speaker is online. Let's begin, and I'll first introduce the series to you. Then perhaps we can go around the table and do some introduction so that the speaker and others are in comfort zone, who else is sitting on the table. And then we'll introduce the speaker, and the floor would be his. 3 to 5. My name is Ali Sheikh, and I work for Lead Pakistan as its Chief Executive Officer. Very deeply and increasingly interested in water issues in its transboundary context. And transboundary definition, in my mind, is not only between countries but also between provinces, and not only the provinces but also the sectors. There are agriculture sector uses and other domestic or commercial uses. So then balance or harmony is in question. So Ali is my name.
My name is Hassan. I also used to work at LEAD till about a few months ago. Currently, I'm doing independent consultancies in the development sector and keenly interested in the issues of water.
My name is Sheikh Khan. I belong to Chitral KPK, doing job with various organizations. Previously, nowadays I'm at home. No job.
Well, I am Azhar Qureshi and one of the fellows of LEAD Pakistan and also a development consultant, and in the meantime also involved with LEAD Pakistan in different activities.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matthew Williger. I work at the U.S. Embassy, and I cover economic and social and science and technology issues, including water. So,
my name is Irfan. I'm an MPT, IT colleague from LEAD Pakistan.
I'm Ashfaq. I'm basically a civil servant of Federal Board of Revenue. Nothing to do with water issues as such, but as a civil servant, yes, certainly I'm interested. What's going on?
Before we go any further, many people in this room will think FB had more to do with water issues than anybody else.
All right, good to know.
My name is Dr. Kamruzaman Chaudhary. In fact, I worked at many places, including LEAD Pakistan for a short time. I was the Director General of Pakistan Meteorological Department earlier. Later, I was also the elected Vice President of World Meteorological Organization for about 5 years. And I also remained special advisor to the United Nations World Meteorological Organization Secretary on water. And I work with Asian Development Bank, UNDP. Presently, I am working with UNEP.
My name is Wakar Khan. I work for a company which invests in water sector, water-related areas, including bulk water supply, water treatment systems, and hydropower. We are investing in Pakistan as well.
My name is Sanaullah Khan. I am a PhD scholar at NTU, and my research interest is climate change as a non-traditional security threat to Pakistan.
My name is Mohammad Ashraf. I have been working as a chairman Pakistan Council of Research in Water Resources. Before that, I worked for IMI Pakistan and also IBADA, International Center for Agriculture Research in my area. My interest is basically in the water sector, both surface and groundwater management, and also the impact of climate on the groundwater.
My name is Khalid Musadullah. I'm a former member of Water and a former chief executive of the Global Water Partnership in Stockholm. Currently a senior advisor to AC Board and lead region. And I'm a water professional who spent much of my life in water in various positions.
I'm Anila Khan. I'm a PhD scholar at the University.
Barrier.
Yes.
Alina Khan.
Anila.
Media outlets in Radio News Network and Power 99. We have a team with us. This is the editor, and we do programming mostly on environmental issues, water issues, climate change issues are our main focus. That's why we are here with Sheikh.
Environmental issues, and I'm happy to be this network for 2005.
Sir Mehmet Pakistan Water Environment Forum.
Welcome, sir.
I am Jasir and master's student.
Sorry, I missed your name.
Jahangir Ali. I am master's student at the National University. I am studying water resources management.
I am Burhan Ahmed, meteorologist from Pakistan Meteorological Department, working in Research and Development Division. Mainly my work is focused on climate change and water resources. And I've worked leads on projects related to water resources and worked on several other projects related to climate change and water resources.
Yes, sir.
So, my name is Saleem from Managing University from the United States. Currently, I'm working with Pakistan.
Which Pakistan, sorry?
Pakistan.
I work as a young professional and learning and knowledge management.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Elena Humayun, and I'm working with the Focal Personal Water Program here.
Hi, my name is Krishna Kavi, and I'm a program officer at the Asia Foundation, Pakistan, and I'm currently working in the economic development and environment. Water is a sort of like a main issue.
Thank you, everyone. We are honored and delighted to have you all here. Allow me to first introduce you what this series is about, and then a little bit about the speaker. Pakistan gets most of its water from its neighbors, India, Afghanistan, China, tiny bit from here and there. Some people say probably in excess of 70%. So we need to learn how best to manage shared basins. From that premises, began an endeavor last year in October to bring some key stakeholders together and to see how best we can try to understand the complexity of the issue. Since then, every other week we have been having a speaker, and today is the 20th or 21st talk in that series. When we started, we thought we'll run out of steam in a few weeks' time. And we really didn't anticipate that it will go beyond 1 kilometer. I'm very happy that we are on to next year, almost middle of next year. I have in front of me a schedule that goes up to December, and we have speaker lined up till March next year. And I hope by March we conclude this series. This series now has 4 elements to it, which I wish to highlight before going further. One is that I was just mentioning before you came, transboundary does not necessarily mean Indus Water Treaty in India, Pakistan. It can include other neighbors as well. So long as there is an upper and lower riparian relationship, it becomes a transboundary. It's also between provinces, be it Balochistan, Sindh, be it KP and Punjab or whatever. But it is also sectoral boundaries which are very important in terms of demand and water sector between domestic users, urban users, agricultural and industrial users. As water quantity is well defined and the population is increasing and middle class practices are increasing, we'll learn how to become a water secure country from a water insecure country, or presently from water scared country. Nothing would happen to this country in 2025. I wish of it. It's a challenge. It will be getting more complex, but we'll be living like we are living now, unless we start taking some actions. So, as our understanding deepened, we are having now 4 types of broad category experts who are joining us. One category is Pakistani experts dealing with different aspects of water and its uses. Second is we are trying to learn from other regions how they have managed transboundary issues. We have had several speakers and some are lined up. In fact, I think even today's speaker is about Armenia and Turkey agreement between 2 countries. We have had speakers from other basins, and I think we have speakers lined up from Mekong and Zambezi, 1 or 2 Latin American countries. So this way our own understanding is expanding how other countries have managed their transboundary relations. Major investments are emerging from private sector, and we have at least 4 or 5 speakers listed between now and December coming from private sector, and at least 1 private sector person I'm very happy to acknowledge. I see your name listed here. Then we are also looking at some of our neighbors, and I think 3 or 4 Afghans are discussing their topics with us these days. We want to see whether or not they can also come and join us and share their perspective, particularly Helmand River agreement that Afghanistan has with Iran. I understand it took them almost 100 years to negotiate. Reach a 100 years, a longer period than Pakistan's entire life. If that is the case, it only tells you how complex and perplexing such issues can be. So we are on learning curve. As you walk out, most of our previous talks were summed up in a short write-up. You can pick some of those. This talk is also serving as a webinar. There may be a group of people who have joined us and we don't know who they are and from which countries or where they are joining in. But certainly there will be questions, and therefore we'll need to be relying on English for the most part. And if anybody has a difficulty, we can live with that as well. It's not an issue. But we want to be sensitive to those who have joined in. In fact, today's speaker joined us on a webinar first. I didn't even know that there was an issue between Armenia and Turkey. And as far as I know, their relationship was very, very complex after an alleged massacre that happened after the First World War. And since then, Turkey-Armenia relations have been much more complex and complicated. They've never been on talking terms. And in fact, it was a constraining factor between USSR and Turkey for the good part of Soviet relationship with Turkey. And we're very fortunate to have today's speaker. Mehmet, you are still there?
Yes, I am here.
Thank you for joining us. Dr. Mehmet Altingoz, is that right, Altingoz?
Yes, this is Mehmet Altingoz, but I'm not a doctor yet. Not yet.
He has just completed his PhD on the same subject a few months ago, and we learned about him, or he learned about us through a webinar, same webinar series that we have. And we are very happy to learn that he did his PhD with a Pakistani scholar who teaches at the same university. And we were hoping that he would also be able to join us, but not. Mehmet has a deep career involvement on water issues from undergrad studies onwards, and he has been certified as a conflict management or transboundary conflict resolution person as well, in addition to his PhD. And his research focuses on the cooperative management of transboundary water resources among conflicting parties. And conflicting parties like Afghanistan and Pakistan are a very easy one because we just happen to be same people on both sides of the border, as is with India. Same culture, same language, same destiny of sharing water resources. So without taking much time, Mehmet, you have about 45 minutes or so, followed up by question and answer sessions. I think you know by now just about everyone who is present in this room. If there is any particular intervention that we need to make, we'll make you a request, but floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure for me to meet you all. So one thing before I start, I don't have a PhD yet. I'm working on it. So okay, let's get started. So today I'll talk about the cooperative management of the Arpachay-Akurian Dam on the Aras, on the Kurab boundary river between Armenia and Turkey. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, it's very clear.
Okay. Okay, good. So first of all, let's do a little bit of a literature review before jumping in the topic. So as you know, many water resources in the world cross political borders, and they are often named transboundary waters. And because they cross borders, they need some sort of cross-border management, some sort of transboundary water management. Who is responsible for this management? So the literature used to think that the states, governments, central authorities are responsible for managing those waters. And they actually, the literature actually perceived the polycentric management, where smaller scale institutions are authorized to make decisions, are problematic. So the state level is considered the appropriate level, and the smaller scales are considered problematic. So in fact, it was thought the water conflicts would occur amongst tribes and cities, states, provinces. So in smaller scales, the conflicts would be more often, and the intensity would be higher. And they used the example of the Soviet Union's dissolution in 1991. Many researchers thought this dissolution will cause future water conflicts among the newly formed former Soviet countries. However, in reality, only a small number of conflicts happened. There has been mostly cooperation via many good committees, agreements, and useful methods. So the literature actually realized the state scale actually was problematic rather than the polycentric management. Rather than small scale, the state scale was problematic. Literature found this out because the state scale presents such as challenges such as scale mismatch problem, communication and decision-making issues. So as you all know, sometimes transboundary waters only concern small border communities, and they usually don't get much they don't have much of a role in the decision making, and the central government makes decisions, but those decisions usually don't work for them. And of course, the issues are over politicized, and decision making is slower, more painful, and so on. So in the last few decades, the literature thought maybe the state-centric system is wrong and the police-centric systems are better. So what I mean by the police-centric approach, I mean there is allocation in decision making. So there is not a central government body that makes all the transboundary water decisions. So in this system, there is allocation in decision making and implementation. So there is allocation in authority. So the management is more devolved in terms of authority. Water management is devolved. So this approach is thought to fix the problems caused by the state-centric systems. And they also thought to provide more opportunities for building experience, learning, in order to improve policies in time. And furthermore, it grows communication, formal, informal, bilateral, multilateral communications and interactions among the parties to build trust, which is needed for cooperation. So we discussed that the literature thought the state-centric was wrong, and police-centric has very good ways of managing waters. However, the state-centric systems continue. Still, the majority of waters, transboundary waters, are managed by state-centric systems. And the literature states that the management of those transboundary waters are usually connected to international relations because of the centric systems. So because there is a state-centric system, the states talk to each other and they manage their transboundary waters. So therefore, the relations between them is important. Whereas in the polycentric system, this might not be as important because the management is at a smaller scale. It's more devolved. It's more polycentric. So therefore, not surprisingly, the literature says if the relations between the two countries are good, they are likely to cooperate over their shared waters as well. If the relations are bad, they will probably not cooperate over their shared water resources. That's true for the most part. It's actually what happens in the world. So look at the Canada, the United States example. There's extensive cooperation, and look at the Danube Basin. There are many many countries in the basin cooperate with each other, and their international relations are very good. However, there are some cases where there is international conflicts. However, there is water cooperation. So this happens in many different levels, international levels, polycentric, local levels, and so on. So to give some examples, Palestine, Israel, India, Pakistan, Armenia, Turkey, Russia, Finland during the Cold War. So there are some examples. There is water cooperation despite international conflicts. There has been some research on this topic. Many studies discuss this was because of necessity, because there is no other way. Water is too important. So we have to cooperate over it. The cost of non-cooperation is too high. One section of the literature discussed that. Another part of the literature said, well, maybe it's not important enough to cooperate over it. I mean, it's not important enough to impact the international relations. So it actually doesn't have much impact in the international relations. When we look at the Cold War example again, during the Cold War relations, everybody thought it was going to lead to a real war. However, and there was actually there was, of course, the relations were really bad, and the cooperation between those countries were not really expected. However, there was cooperation, for example, in the fields of postal service, radio, and etc. So that makes us think, well, maybe sometimes even enemies cooperate over things if they think, well, this is not really related to our conflict. So maybe the water is the same way. Some literature discusses that maybe water is unimportant. So but the third a third idea is that so we discussed maybe water is too important and water is not important enough. This is two ideas in the literature that tries to explain why there's cooperation despite international conflicts. And the third idea is, well, they say, why do you think cooperation and conflict are two opposite things? They can go together. They can actually coexist. There's not a scale from 0 to 10 to a number to give a number to cooperation or conflict. So these are actually more complicated than we think. So this is the third way of thinking this. So as I just discussed, the literature discusses to some extent the reasons behind transboundary water cooperation between conflicting parties. At the state-centric system, it does, but it doesn't explain this cooperation at the polycentric systems. So to generate knowledge in this virgin field, we looked at the Arpachai-Akurian Dam between Turkey and Armenia, between Armenia and Turkey. So this dam is located on the Kura River that makes the border between Armenia and Turkey. So why we selected this case is there is extensive conflict. There's a lot of conflict between Armenia and Turkey. There is no international relations. The relations is becoming better, but it has been really bad. So, but while the relations are really bad, there is cooperation over the Arpachai and Akurian Dam, and those countries have polycentric systems. So this would be a good case for us to generate knowledge in this virgin field. So how are these countries? How do those countries have polycentric systems? So Turkey has 26 water districts under the Ministry of Environment, and one of the 26 water districts is responsible. I mean, one unit in this in these one of the 20 in these one in one of the 26 water districts is responsible. So 26 districts, one of them, a unit in one of them is responsible for this dam. The scenario is similar in Armenia. They have the state water intake company. It operates under the regional Akurian RX branch of JRR CJSG. So the management in both Turkey and Armenia is very problematic. I mean, is very devolved, is polycentric, not state-centric. So let's look in the case. So as you can see on the map on left, the Kura-Arax River Basin is shared between Turkey, between Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, Iran, Turkey, and Russia. Maybe a little bit Russia, maybe not. So you see the Akurian, you see the Arpacha Akurian Dam on the border, right on the Arax River. So the USSR and Turkey had a lot of cooperation over their shared waters. They signed their first agreement in 1927, and they formed a joint committee in 1927, which was very ahead of its era. So they had extensive cooperation. As an outcome, in 1983, they built a dam on the border river, Arax River. So they equally shared the water from there, and they used the dam primarily for irrigation, fishing, and domestic purposes. The main purpose of this dam was not actually generating, irrigation, fishing, or domestic purposes. The main idea was to use this dam as a way to enhance cooperation between the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics and Turkey. So the main purpose was actually environmental peace building, where environmental factors are used to improve international relations. So this cooperation continued until the dissolution of the USSR in 1991. So when the USSR dissolved, along with many other new countries, Armenia was founded. So while the dam was managed between the USSR and Turkey, now the dam is managed between Armenia and Turkey. So the managing parties changed. However, despite the conflicts between Armenians and Turks and Armenians lived together for how long? For about 1,000 years. And 100 years ago, before the World War, conflicts began. Many sad things happened, and this was the beginning of the conflict, and the issues pretty much continue since then. So despite all these conflicts between the countries, there is extensive cooperation over the dam. And after the dissolution of the USSR, the cooperation, you would expect the cooperation to stop, and you would expect them to fight, but the cooperation continued at the same level, if not more. So what we looked at was, you want the answer, how this cooperation has been sustained and how this kind of cooperation can be incorporated in similar cases. So, in order to pursue answers, we interviewed many people from the Armenian and Turkish side. So in this study, first we presented a brief description of the regulatory framework and institutional framework, and secondly we analyzed the current implementation of these frameworks. Are they actually being implemented? That's what we analyzed, and finally we derived lessons from the cooperative joint management. So again, of course we are in academia, so we often review the literature and see what it says for our cases. And for our case, the literature spans around the importance of the design of institutions. So Ostrom, she received a Nobel. She a few years ago passed away. Rest in peace. So she actually did a lot of research on this, and she actually specified classified how to design joint management institutions. And surprisingly, we saw many of the principles that Eleanor Ostrom revealed after her research are actually implied, are actually used are actually used in the Arpachai dam. Also, another point, one leg was, as I just said, institutional design of the institutions that manage the shared waters. The second leg of it is environmental peace building aspect of it. So institutions are important to use environmental factors as peace builders. And the other part that the literature actually said is about the institutional design. International water disputes get resolved even among enemies, and even as conflicts erupt over other issues, as the institutions they have created often prove to be resilient even when relations are strained. So the institutional design is very, very important, and what we saw in this case is one of the things we saw in this case is institutional design is very, very favorable. So let's look at the regulatory framework that govern the Arpachai Dam. So there are actually many agreements, but a memoranda of understanding, but there are three main ones. There are three main agreements that were signed in 1927, 1964, and 73. So all those, of course, were signed by the USSR and Turkey because Armenia was founded in 1991 after the dissolution of the USSR. In 1927, as I previously mentioned, the USSR and Turkey signed an agreement saying, look, we will share every transboundary water resource we have in half. So I get half, you get half. We'll enforce this by a joint committee. So this agreement was very good for its, especially considering the time it was signed, and future agreements took many provisions from it. So in the early 60s, the USSR and Turkey started talking about building a dam on their border rivers. In 1964, they signed a protocol. They said, okay, we have decided to build a dam, so let's do this in the future. In 73, they signed another agreement, and they finally, after a number of memorandum of understanding, they actually came to an agreement, and they decided to build a dam in 1973. And they established the Permanent Water Commission, PWC, and the subcommission to jointly manage the dam. So again, they would equally share the water from this dam, and they would equally construct the dam as well. So everything, it's just 50% contribution from both sides and 50% benefit for the both sides. So the dam was completed in 1983, and the 1927 committee that still exists at the moment, and it was actually replaced with the 1973 Permanent Water Commission, PWC. So actually, the PWC has 7 representatives from each country. So it meets once per month, both in Turkey and Armenia, in the protocol rooms built on both sides of the dam. So let's say in August, the Turkish representatives, 7 Turkish representatives, they go to the Armenian side. They actually cross the border, and they go to Armenia. They don't need passports or visas for that. They have some other permits. I recall. So they travel to the other side, and there is a protocol building by the dam. So they sit in this dam with the Armenian representatives, and they discuss how they will manage the dam for the upcoming month. So they make a plan for a month, and during the month, the subcommittee, which has 11 members from each country, it's a bigger committee. They meet up to 8 times by the water intakes. They travel together. So 11 Armenians, 11 Turks from both sides. They travel together. Of course, they cross borders. They travel together, and they meet by the water intake locations. Their meetings are more informal. They are more technical, and they make decisions momentarily. They literally work together. So they enforce the decisions taken by the PwC every month. So the next month, let's say September, this time Armenians come to Turkey, to the protocol building by the dam. So it's symmetrical, identical buildings in both sides of the dam, both sides of the border. So this time they come and they meet, and they again make a plan for the upcoming month. And again, the subcommittee, which has 22 members in total, 11 members from each country, meet and meet many times during the month and enforce those decisions. So as I was just saying, the joint committee members for both the PwC and the subcommittee are mostly technicians. They are not really politicians or high-level government officials. So I briefly mentioned the duties, duties of the PwC, but to be more exact, I will list its responsibilities. It operates the dam and its facilities. It makes annual and monthly allocation schedules. So it, of course, does the maintenance for the dam and for the dam lake reservoir, enforces the fish production, and it does conflict resolution. So there's an internal conflict resolution system in the committee. But according to the agreement, if the committee cannot come to an agreement, if they can't resolve a conflict, they are supposed to notify the central to higher authority. However, this never happened. So they have an internal conflict resolution system, but it seems like they have taken care of all the conflicts they have had so far, since they haven't talked to a higher authority about any of the conflicts. Or maybe they didn't have any conflicts, but probably they had some disagreements. So we generated many reasons why this kind of cooperation has been sustained over the years. So we understand there's comprehensive, clear, and sustainable regulatory and institutional framework. So the agreements are very good, and the language, it's comprehensive, it's clear, it's sustainable. They're just good. And there's low profile, high politics free, and at a technical level management. So the local authorities actually stated that they are putting substantial effort to keep third parties and high level politicians away. And I must admit, they are very successful at doing this. I have been studying water for over 10 years, and I did not know about this dam before I started this research. So you don't see this on TV. Nobody knows about it, even though I studied water. I didn't know about it. So it's kept low profile, high politics free, because the committee is actually afraid that if the higher politics knew about this cooperation, or if the public knew about this cooperation, both in Armenia and Turkey, of course, maybe this cooperation could be interrupted or maybe hindered. So we don't know if their concern is actually legitimate, but that's what they think. The third thing is they have instant communication. Their communication is very informal. They talk to each other during the day via phones, emails, cell phone messages, text messages. They talk to each other very frequently and very informally. And as I was just saying, up to 8 times the subcommittee meets per month. So that means 3.5 days, one meeting per 3.5 days. So they meet twice per week. So they keep they actually see what's going on in the other side. So there's no, it doesn't cause distrust or conspiracy. So this of course is useful for sustaining consensus as well. Meeting frequently sustains consensus. And one of the very interesting things is the parties' water gauges are located in each other's regions. So Armenians' water gauge is in Turkey, and Turkey's water gauge is in Armenia. So actually, Armenians are monitoring how much water Turkey is taking every day. Constantly, they're monitoring this. The same thing for the Turks. So Turks can monitor how much water actually Armenians are using. So are they actually obeying the decisions taken at the PwC meetings, or they are not? So you can actually see it. You don't. So there is trust, and there's reliable access to information. That has a really vital role. And of course, there's a long-standing management experience over the 90 years. Since 1927, there's joint management, so there's so much experience in the region. Also, there's support from the local administrations and local people. So as an example, in 2014 there was a severe drought, and the PwC decided that the parties would alternately withdraw water. So 1 week Turkey took water from the dam, and the next week Armenia took water from the dam. So that was a measure that the PwC took because they have authority. They have full authority in their management. And they also took similar measures internally. So the farmers would alternately use the water as well. In addition, they did other practices such as nighttime irrigation and so on. So 7 main lessons we derived from this case. So collaborative frameworks, when they are established, they tend to be resilient, even if the government setting changes. So the cooperation over the dam remained the same, if not more, after the dissolution of the USSR. So it's thought this is partially owed to the useful, good management frameworks, and this management practices, regulatory framework survived not only the dissolution, but also the international crisis between Armenia and Turkey over the years. However, establishing new frameworks are problematic. New projects are not happening, even though in the region there is need for a new dam, an additional dam. Both parties agree to that, but actually this is not happening. There is not even, it's not even argued. New things are difficult to do when there's conflicts between the parties. So the third lesson we received is not all cooperation needs to be explicit. You don't have to advertise your cooperation. Sometimes cooperation needs to be kept low profile due to political sensitivities. Maybe in some cases, the public is not happy about hearing about the cooperation with quote unquote enemy. So maybe if the Armenian and Turkey higher politicians and Armenian and Turkish publics knew about this, maybe this cooperation wouldn't be at the same level today. So sometimes cooperation could be kept low profile. This is another lesson we received. And in fact, all of our interviewees said this. They had 100% agreement on this. We don't know if this is actually tested, but well, you don't actually want to test that, I guess. So another lesson is language of agreements are important. So in the 1927 and 1973 agreements, harm, for example, is not defined. So the language is actually ambiguous. So there is creative ambiguity in the language. So because harm is not clearly defined, so in the agreement it says you shouldn't harm the other party. It's pretty general. So because the harm is not clearly defined, this gives the parties the possibility of building other sort of water projects internally on the tributaries. So we think the language, this was ambiguous on purpose. Also, water management during droughts, in cases droughts, is not defined. So this led the local management to take creative measures, as I discussed, nighttime irrigation, and they alternatively used water during the 2014 drought. So this was, even if this was unintentional, it has a positive impact. So the language is important. And regardless of how agreements are written, the trust and generosity is in interpretation goes a long way. So droughts, again, the drought example, it was handled with compassion and creativity on both sides. And the parties were actually pretty helpful to each other to overcome this mutual problem. Trust and easily accessible information is very important. As we discussed earlier, there is constant communication between the parties, easy access to data. The water gauges are on the Turkish water gauge is in Armenia, the Armenian water gauge is in Turkey. So they actually can monitor real time what's happening on the other side. So trust is built through this, and of course parties working, and of course the subcommittee and the PwC, the main committee, working together, verifying the data, long management experience, So authority of the committee, all these helped build trust. So focusing cooperation at the technical level seems to function well as I was saying. Sometimes high politics might not be the best way to go. So maybe technicians who actually do not really talk about the politics could be more useful in some cases. So after this research in the future, what I'm thinking about looking at is how can we translate this cooperation to the broader context and to other areas such as science, technology, and energy. So water cooperation, for water cooperation to higher level of cooperation such as energy cooperation. How can we do this? How can we use environmental factors in a good way to improve international relations as a peace builder? There's extensive literature on this one. So actually, the literature says environmental cooperation can lead to international peacemaking, and there's actually extensive research on this. So I would like to acknowledge my co-authors here. We did this research. I was involved in this research during my master's education, and my advisor, Aaron Wolf, and his advisee, Melissa, and Mr. Gavinian, who worked at UNESCO at the time, and we conducted this research together, and the author and the order of authors is alphabetical. It's not about the contribution, it's about the alphabetical order. I thank to them. I also thank to the World Bank for funding this project. And the full report can be found in this link here. It's in the World Bank webpage. The case studies and the main report, they both are actually in the World Bank project. If you Google it, you would easily find it. So, okay, we talked about this project, and what does this mean actually? I mean, the polycentric system, we said, yeah, that's really good, that helped, that offered privacy in local water management, and we actually thought this was what avoided the international conflicts. And also, in the region, the parties went one step further, and they said, okay, they had this polycentric private management. In addition to that, they kept it low profile from the others. So the cooperation is almost a secret. I didn't know about it, even though I studied water for a very long time. So what does this mean? This means, to me, the polycentric approach seemed to work in this case, but actually the polycentric system presents some challenges too. As I was discussing earlier, one of the very important aspects of the environmental cooperation is that the possibility of taking this environmental cooperation to an international level, to international cooperation level. So we actually really want to, I mean as researchers, we want to use environmental factors such as peace parks, transboundary water resources, and so on. We want to use those environmental factors, shared environmental factors, to improve the relations between the countries. But the polycentric approach kind of hinders this, because it gives privacy. It keeps the management low profile, so the others don't know about it. So there's actually it doesn't. So this cooperation doesn't really translate to other to broader context. So in Turkey, for example, it didn't translate to other contexts. Still, Turkey doesn't recognize Armenia, and Armenia doesn't recognize Turkey. Still, the relations are not favorable. So the polycentricity actually so there's this dilemma: should we actually keep this low profile because it's working, but it's not making? It's maybe we should try to expand this cooperation to broader context, but this would be
Mehmet, it seems that we are losing you. Can we redial? Disconnect करके दोबारा करें. Wrapping up in any case, right? Just bring him back for the question answer.
Basically, he has almost finished.
Just need him for question answer. Well, in any case, while my colleagues are dialing, let's see if we can get him back. I wanted to reintroduce Dr. Ashraf from PCIWR, who is known to many of us. We had requested him to coordinate moderate the discussion if there were any questions. Maybe while we are connecting, we can open the floor and start a conversation amongst ourselves, so that even if it doesn't get connected, our time is not wasted. So it seems to me that Afghanistan was the first country that recognized Pakistan. We may have not agreed on the Durand line, where exactly our borders are, but otherwise, last 70 years we have had good working relationships, despite all the difficulties. Here is a case where the two countries I just heard do not even recognize each other, and the agreement conversations are more than 100 years ago, 2017 or 2027, the first protocol. So water issues tend to be very complex, take much longer, and what the main thrust I seem to understand from his presentation, and others may have their own conclusions, that despite difficult political relations, you can isolate technical solutions and cooperation, particularly water issues in this instance. That's the conclusion that I picked from this.
How to depoliticize.
Yeah.
But I would like
to on to you to moderate.
I would like to make a point. We should understand that this agreement itself was initiated
Hello?
in Turkey and the Soviet Union. Mutually
Hello? Yeah, I don't know what happened. I think it disconnected.
instituted in the
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, good.
You can conclude, and then we can have a small discussion, question-answer session as well.
All right, sounds good. Okay, I will continue. So I was discussing one of the problems that the polycentric approach has, it prevents cooperation to go broader context. So in the academia we have this dilemma: should we actually keep the cooperation low profile, or should we actually try to advertise this cooperation to have higher level of cooperation in other fields? So there's this dilemma. So I haven't done much research about the Pakistan case, but I know that India and Pakistan signed this agreement in 1960, even despite their problematic relations after a long negotiation period. And I actually looked at the treaty. It has pretty good provisions, very similar provisions to the USSR-Turkey agreement. So I was just thinking to myself, I don't know much about the Pakistan water resources. I was just thinking to myself, to me it seems like there's some sort of there's a conflict going on right now with India due to the dam constructions. The points I think are the population threefolded in time since the agreement. There's climate change and water needs increase due to industrialization, and of course threefolded population need more water, ask for more water. And it seems like the management is over politicized. So I was just thinking, how is the management going on right now? Does the committee meet often? I mean, is it? What do you think? Is the Indus more resilient to future changes? I would like to hear your opinions about the comparison. Maybe not comparison, but what do you think the Indus and Turkey and the Arpaçay Dam agreement have in common? What kind of things, what kind of lessons do both agreements offer for each other? All right. So yeah, your questions and comments.
Okay, thank you very much, Mehmet, for this very nice presentation and giving us the way forward.
You're welcome. Thank you.
In fact, you have, instead we ask you question, you have put a series of questions to us as well. And
Yep.
I have very senior colleagues who would love to answer some of those questions. So now we open the floor for question and comments.
My question to Mehmet. It's a very interesting model that you have presented, this so-called polycentric model. But there are two questions from my side. When this agreement was initiated, it was not between two states that did not recognize each other. It was actually between Turkey and the Soviet Union. And over a period of 60, 70 years, they had a series of cooperative agreements, and a whole convention was built through this cooperation. So after the breakup of the Soviet Union, then it was reduced to say an agreement between Turkey and Armenia, which have strong adversarial relationships. It was the momentum of the convention that continued. Do you think this polycentric model can be built ab initio without the involvement of the central governments?
So yeah, actually what the literature says about this is the management should be polycentric with supervision from the central government, but just supervision, not actually management. And I agree to that literature.
And secondly, you see, it's a very small part of the water needs of the two countries. You said that there are so-called 36 water districts in Turkey, and it only affects one of the water districts. So it's a very, in that sense, although I mean it has its say significant features that can be adopted or adapted to other transboundary issues. It looks like a very localized agreement, not affecting large populations or large areas, or even large amounts of water. Am I right?
Correct. Yes, you're right. It's local. It's pretty local.
Yeah, Mr. Mehmet, I think it was a very interesting case that you presented, but I agree with Dr. Raj that the issue of scale is very important. We are talking about, so there's really no comparison between this arrangement and what we have here between India and Pakistan. Here, the economy, for example, the entire agricultural economy, and in fact, in Pakistan's case, we are talking about the water economy all as a whole. It's a whole different ball game that we're talking about. But I think the similarity only comes from the point of view that things can work if there is good intent. And I think here in this case, in your case, the intent evolved over a period of time from the agreement that was reached between the Soviet Union and Turkey, in which these two countries, for example, Egypt and Armenia, found a niche where they could both benefit from intervention of this kind. And so they've profited from that, and they want to dwell more on it and improve it further and to make it work.
Yes, so I agree with you. The scale is a very important part of this discussion, as I was discussing in the beginning. In the past, the small scales were perceived as problematic. Even right now, bigger scales are perceived more problematic. So more local, more polycentric, more devolved management is actually better. That's what the literature discusses. So one of the things why this management actually works is we thought because it was the local management. It only concerned a small part of the country, which managed to manage the water cooperatively. We don't see this sort of cooperation in bigger basins such as the Tigris and Euphrates.
Yeah. So and the
well, of course, this local management has examples for the higher levels as well. Of course, not entirely. Of course, the lessons are not entirely applicable to the bigger scales, but it does have some good insights for in general for transboundary water management.
But I think the point that you made earlier is extremely important, and I think that is equally important in our case as well. And the thing to note is that treaties can only be as good and effective as the relations between the parties. If the political relationship is soured, howsoever comprehensively good and howsoever effective the treaty is otherwise, it cannot really work, because you cannot invoke your mechanisms for problem solving all the time, and you can't go to arbitration then to tribunals to settle issues. So that's why what I really want to emphasize is that apart from collaboration and trust, intent is extremely important in bilateral relationships where you want to share.
Goodwill is very important.
Exactly. And the other thing is, of course, probably in the same context, it's really the letter and spirit. Unless you respect the letter and spirit of what you've agreed during implementation, you cannot work. You cannot work satisfactorily. And I think that's something that we have to keep in mind. In our case, we have found we were so clear among ourselves, and the treaty is so clear about the fact that the 3 eastern rivers were given to India and the 3 western rivers given to Pakistan. But when we came to implementation, we discovered, and now we are finding, that in any sound relationship, this letter and spirit is not honored, and that is where the whole problem then begins to.
Yes.
Dr. Mehmet, my point is perhaps the opposite of what my friend Rizvi said. Yes, it's a very small amount of water. Yes, compared to some of the issues that we deal here in South Asia. But I think the principles that you mentioned are very pertinent and relevant for us. For example, isolating a technical issue from political or politically hot situation. In 1947, when we became independent, India stopped our water, and 70 years later, we have not forgotten. Our third generation has not forgotten. But what we need to remember is, during those difficult times, our leadership had the vision to isolate water issues, and we allowed our technical people to negotiate a treaty. And that, I think, is the principle that you have highlighted. That we need to isolate from politics some of the mutual interest issues, such as resolving water issues. I think the second point, at least I see, is also very important, and very quickly I mentioned that. Your protocol started with Russia, then came to Soviet Union, then Soviet Union collapsed, then came to Armenia. Now, that's a journey of 90 years that you mentioned in your presentation.
Correct.
Also tells me that a 1,000-mile journey begins with one step, and the next step may take another 30 years or 40 years. In South Asia, we tend to think big steps, and we don't settle for small steps. In 70 years of our history, on one side, we have not taken very many actions, and on the other side, we are struggling with some of the actions. So I think the point that I'm trying to understand is that from earlier cases that we discussed in this forum, the transboundary water was taken as a process, and there was no fine agreement on day one or during first decade. It's a process through which you keep on refining your protocols and your agreements, your trust building, as Dr. Khalid Mawdudullah has mentioned, and then you can have a better relationship. I think, at least for me, there were 2 take-home messages.
Thank you very much. That was
I agree with you. As we were discussing earlier as well, when you try to take politics out of water, that's in the work for many cases, but actually you in reality you can't really take politics out of water, and even if you do, it also has some consequences, such as not translating the cooperation to broader context. But maybe around the world, water resources are maybe over politicized. Maybe politics are too much involved in those in transboundary water management.
All right, Hassan, please. Mehmet, I am Dr. Hassan. I have one question here. It is beyond Armenia and Turkey. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, so it goes beyond Armenia and Turkey. As we see the basin, the river ultimately drains into Caspian Sea. How big is the dam, and what are the impacts of this dam on the Caspian Sea? Have there been any issues by the Caspian states, which is
Previously, it was just Iran and Soviet Union, but now there are 7 or 8 states which are sharing Caspian Sea, and reportedly the levels in Caspian Seas are going down. And second question is that now Iran and Azerbaijan are lower riparians. Have they had ever any issues with this dam which was built upstream?
Dr. Aslan, I'm glad you asked this question because I realized I didn't give much information about the basin in general. So this basin actually originates in Turkey. As if you can see my cursor here, it originates here and it goes and here, the second leg, this is the Kura River, this is the Arax River. They both originate in northeastern Turkey and they go through those countries and meet in Azerbaijan and go to the Caspian Sea. So actually, this part of Turkey is very mountainous, very green, very water rich. It doesn't really need much water here. And as I was just saying, the waters originate here from the mountains. And Armenia and Turkey and Iran seem to not be very dependent on those water resources. Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan are very dependent on those water resources. As you can see, the entire Armenia is in this watershed, and almost the entire Azerbaijan, and a big portion of Georgia. So they are very dependent on those water resources. Not Turkey and Iran, not much Turkey and Iran. So they actually, those three parties actually have many management practices as well, aside from the Turkish-Armenia case. The Turkish-Armenia case has only this little dam here in this huge watershed, and it really doesn't really have much impact on the Caspian Sea and on the other regions. And in fact, the USSR built 3 more dams here with Iran for the same purpose, like it did with Turkey. So there are 3 more dams here actually on the border, on the Arax River. So what I'm saying is there is extensive water quality and water quality issues in the Kura-Arax River basin between Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia, but that's of course out of our scope. However, in our report, there is a write-up about the Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. When you think about Kura-Arax River basin, you usually think about those 3 countries because they are the most dependent ones. Turkey and Iran seem to be not much dependent on those.
Right.
And Caspian Sea, of course, yeah, water quality is a big issue in the region, and they're trying to figure it out, but it's not looking so good.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Any other question?
Dr. Mehmet, I am Azhar Qureshi. I have the personal views that, honestly speaking, this is a very simple form of water agreement between 2 countries. There is no rocket science in it, except the main quality of this agreement is that a high level of trust has been established between the parties and the momentum has been maintained that is still going on. The main issue for us is that we want to replicate or implement such type of agreements between India, Pakistan, and Pakistan, Afghanistan, etc. But we already lack the trust. The things are already politicized. There is a war-like situation. We are competing with each other. So I don't think that this can be replicated over here unless we have the high level of trust that has been established in your case in this area.
Yes, while this case is not replicable to any of the cases, of course, it offers some lessons, but not really applicable to, it's not even applicable to the other river basins in Turkey. So as you were saying, I completely agree. Trust is very, very important. Armenians and Turks, I don't think there's so much trust between the two, but as I was saying during the presentation, the water gauges of Turkey is in Armenia. The water gauges of Armenia is in Turkey. So, and there is data sharing as well. So there is constant data sharing, and there is no way. So it's not that the countries trust each other. It's that they just have the reliable information. They don't. There's no reason to not to trust each other. They have the high quality data in their hands. So as you were saying, yeah, trust is very important. Maybe in the Pakistan case, those kind of, not in the Pakistan case, in general for the transboundary water resources, those kind of measures maybe can be taken, such as the water gauges in different countries or meeting rooms in different countries, instant communication via phone, text messages, and so on. So there are these kind of things that can improve trust. Maybe in time will improve trust enough to actually cooperate over the waters.
I think one of the most important thing, as you mentioned, the improved communication and also the access to the reliable information. These are the two crucial point for this, the proper or the beneficial sharing of these, the river basins. The communication, because we can see that they are meeting 8 times a month or once a month, whereas in case of India, Pakistan, we are sometimes meeting after a couple of years, and there is no proper mechanism of information sharing between the two countries. I think this is the access to the reliable information. As you mentioned that the Armenian water gauging stations are in the Turkey, and Turkey gauging station are in Armenian. So such kind of information, they can help build the trust. So
yes.
Question from my colleagues.
Right.
Just one comment. My name is Omar. I'm with UNDP Pakistan.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
My name is Omar. I'm with UNDP Pakistan. Just one question.
Okay.
This is just for the participants over here as well. I believe the test for any treaty is more about the time when there is water shortage, right? For Pakistan and India, Indus Water Treaty has has been tested over time. We didn't have much significant issues till the time that water. It's not just the water is being scarce. I believe I heard in your presentation you mentioned similarly for Turkey there is not much issue. Its reliance on the water from this river is very little. So I believe that's one reason why the treaty itself or the dam, the way the water distribution is managed is more successful, because it's not dependent per se on the countries are not much dependent on the water. So in the context of Pakistan, I believe now that we are encountering, both the countries are encountering issues of water scarcity and climate change. Now the treaty is being tested in terms of its its survival. I believe the points that you mentioned are very important. The terms the issues of better communication, sharing of data, I think would be one way we can they can help building trust and confidence between the two countries. In this case, Pakistan and India.
Yes. So the locals actually in the region are very dependent on the water, but not the country itself, not the countries itself. The locals are dependent on the water here in this case.
Okay.
More questions? So, Mehmet, can you put the last slide so that we can see your questions and I can ask my colleagues?
Yeah. Let me see. The Indus Basin is pretty interesting to me. I keep reading about it recently.
Very interesting and very complex basin as well.
Yeah. Yes, it is. That slide, you mean?
The last one where you put the questions for the Indus, water.
Okay, here. This one here. Do you agree to those points? Do you think I misunderstood something here?
That was under brainstorming, I think.
Yeah, in the brainstorm. Last session where you put some question. Yeah,
this one. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. The last one. The second. Yeah, this one. Here you have put some questions.
These not actually questions. These are my brainstorming about the Indus River Basin. I was wondering if you agree to those, and I was wondering if you could answer those two questions. Actually, you just said we meet sometimes once in 2 years, so the meetings are pretty. It seems like not often.
Yeah.
So I was just brainstorming about the Indus Basin, and I was thinking how what kind of lessons the Arpache Dam can offer for it, or what kind of lessons the Indus River can offer for Arpache, or for water, for transboundary water management in general. So I just wanted to open this to discussion. Any comments? Yeah, any insights would be helpful.
Is actually what is this water treaty sitting here can give us a better idea how many.
I can't hear. I can't hear.
I'm just saying any person who's actually involved in the Indus Water Treaty sitting here would be a better person to state how many times do we meet in Pakistan and India about this water treaty and all. So if there's anybody who hasn't worked on Indus Water Treaty, please come forward.
Actually, Khalid Motazillah, he has been working on the He has left, sorry. Otherwise, he would have been able to answer this question. So, if you don't have any questions, then we can just. Madam Hassan?
Yes, I have a comment about Indus Basin Treaty. Like the way treaty was planned, it was again planned by financiers and engineers. And during the negotiations, there was a time when somebody made this statement. I think it was Lilianthal who made this statement. He said, "This is the job of engineers and financiers. So let us solve this problem and everybody gets a side." Now that was the global mind at that time. But today we want to involve all the stakeholders. And I think today's approach is better. Secondly, the treaty gave a concept to both sides that if the water is flowing in the river, it is unused. If it is taken out of the river, it is used. Therefore, build as many dams and diversions as possible. And while doing so, both countries totally wrecked their environment and they did not get the benefits that they thought they would get. And if they got some benefits, they were temporary in nature. And the damages they got were permanent in nature. So the scale of interventions were too big compared to our wisdom. So the power of machines and the power of finances that we got out of this treaty, our limited knowledge could not handle it safely. And today we are facing the consequences. We are not short on water in either country. We are short on management.
Okay.
Because pollution and so many other issues which have been created because of those large interventions have now created more problems for us.
One of the most important thing is another thing is that it is always taken at the highest political level rather than taken at the lowest political level, unfortunately. So they are always trying to use it politically, but their political motives. All the parties in government, they are trying to take water as a politics. They always want to take water as a politics.
Yeah, water is too much connected to politics in the world. In many regions, we see that. So, how many tributaries does the Indus and how many tributaries do Pakistan and India share?
Actually, there are,
I mean, a rough number, 5, 10?
No, there are basically 6 tributaries. 3 are actually taken up by the India, and 3 Pakistan is using. On western side, Pakistan is using, whereas on the eastern side, India is using. India has the exclusive right on those 3 rivers.
Yeah. I was just thinking in general for transboundary water management. I don't know much about the Pakistan and India case, but I was just thinking in general. What if every tributary had its own committee, joint committee, and with trust building mechanisms? Would that be helpful for transboundary water management? Would that be sustainable? It might work for some cases, I think.
You mean, the transboundary management for individual tributary?
No, I meant more polycentric approach. For example, every tributary of the Indus, for example, or every tributary of transboundary water management.
Mehmet, we do not manage the water tributary by tributary. I mean, our water management is not divided on the watersheds between the tributaries. It is kind of a holistic.
Yes, I know. I was.
There are too
I
many
was just saying, what if?
Inter-tributary transfers. There are too many of them, and we do not recognize the catchment of a tributary as a management zone.
I understand that. I was just thinking, what if it is recognized? What if it is considered? Would that be helpful? Maybe.
Oh, that would be very challenging. Actually, that would have been the best thing to do to begin with. But now that there are so many interventions in this basin, that the natural hydrology has been completely modified. I mean, nowhere in the world a river has been completely shut down. Nowhere in the world. It is only 3 rivers of Indus which have been completely shut down. So this is a very interesting case. Indus is a very interesting case.
Interesting.
I see. Yeah.
So,
any other questions or insights?
Yes, please. One question.
Mehmet, I would want you to shift a little away from Indus or Arax River to Kura River.
Okay.
Between Georgia and Turkey, obviously there is this transboundary rivers that flow, and Georgia is obviously planning and constructing as well certain dams on their side. So has there been any conflict in that respect between Georgia and Turkey, or if there had been?
Well, yeah. Okay. So Georgia and Turkey have pretty good relations, actually. Turkey is the upstream in this river. In both rivers, Turkey is upstream, so Turkey actually doesn't really. I mean, the dams on the basin doesn't really impact Turkey because Turkey is upstream on both rivers. Dams in Turkey actually would bother Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan and Iran. So, and Turkey, as long as I know, Turkey doesn't have much development in the region. It's pretty water rich, it's pretty mountainous and sparsely populated, this region. So there's no conflict that I know of.
But what if in future Turkey decides to build dams on its side? Because as I understand, some of the dams on the Georgian side are selling electricity or are planning to sell electricity to the Turkish grid. So I assume that if Turkey were to build dams on its side for power generation, then the dams downstream would be impacted.
Yes, I did some research in Georgia as well in the past. So Georgia sells so much electricity to Turkey. That's a fact. But I think the dams from which they sell electricity to Turkey are not located on the Kura River. I believe they are located on the Anguri River, which is up here. But of course, if Turkey built dams, it would impact Georgia's electricity generation, and of course, it would potentially be an issue between the two countries. But I think it would be solved easily because the relations are pretty good between the two countries, and not very water scarce area. It's pretty it's a pretty wet area here, water rich area. If I can show you briefly. So actually, this region has the highest water level in Turkey. And of course, those countries are water rich too.
So from what I gather from your description is that at the moment there is no specific water sharing treaty or framework between the two countries, but still, every country is...
Not with Georgia. Yeah, not with Georgia. Yeah, as you can see, it's just mountainous, snowy mountains, and just forest. So it's pretty water rich around here.
Okay, Dr. Mehmet, thank you very much for your thought-provoking talk. I believe that a number of principles you have mentioned can be applied to the other basins to resolve the conflict and to manage the shared basins. I believe that in USA you are quite early in the morning, and we are really thankful to you for sparing time and delivering this excellent talk. And I also I'm thankful to my colleagues who have gathered here in Pakistan to listen and share knowledge with you. With these remarks, thank you very much, and we wish you all the good luck.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. It was an honor for me to talk about my research to you, and I hope you enjoyed it. And I wish to meet you in person in the future. And I wish you all my respects to you all.
Thank you. Thank you once again.
Thank you. Bye.
Sir, a question for audiences.